Good afternoon, buenos dias, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual afternoon with Negesti Kaudo and Kristen, Elias, Rowley to discuss Ripe essays published by our friends at Mad Creek Books. Negesti Kaudo is a Midwestern essayist who holds an MFA in creative nonfiction from Columbia College, Chicago, and has worked as a copywriter, a sex toy columnist, and an adjunct writing instructor. Her work has appeared in Fourth Genre, Best American Experimental Writing, and elsewhere. Ripe is her first book. To moderate this afternoon's conversation, we are also joined by Kristen Elias Rowley, who is editor-in-chief at the Ohio State University Press, where she acquires for the Mad Creek Books imprint she launched in 2017, publishing a dozen nonfiction, fiction, graphic novels, and poetry books annually. Books she's edited have been recognized by the National Book Foundation, Lambda Literary, PEN America, and many others. Authors she's published have gone on to receive NEA Creative Writing Fellowships and Guggenheim Fellowships. She's been in the university publishing for 17 years, previously acquiring for the University of Nebraska Press and Potomac Books. Throughout this afternoon's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask the Question feature at the bottom of the screen. And please order your copy of Ripe from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Negesti.
and I'm Kristen.
Kristen, I'm going to start with reading a couple passages from one of the pieces in the book called Unbothered. It's a flash series, so if it sounds repetitive, it's supposed to be that way. And I'm just going to start in the middle, so you'll have to buy the book to get the entire thing. All right. And when it happens, it won't sit with you right. You'll feel a pang in your chest, and you won't be sure if it's anger or sadness. You'll have three options: fight, flight, or. I have saved up the $300 for the Dr. Dre headphones I want. In the Apple Store in Columbus, Ohio, with my best friend and sister, we are hanging out by the headphones, laughing while I survey each pair, making sure that these are the ones I want. A man, an Apple genius, walks up to our group and we stop laughing. He looks at me. I'm going to need to see your bag. My messenger bag is hanging at my hip, latch closed. Why? Someone said they saw you put a pair of headphones in your bag. My best friend throws her hands up and storms out of the store. My sister follows. I look back down at my bag, still closed and never opened while I was inside the store. Who? I know I don't have to show him the inside of my bag. I know that this mixture of fear and rage is causing my hands to shake and my heart to pound. He points behind me at the Genius Bar. They are all staring at our interaction. A blonde woman turns away. Why would I steal a pair of headphones when I came here to buy them? I need to see inside your bag. And when it happens, it won't sit with you right. You'll feel a pang in your chest and you won't be sure if it's anger or sadness. You'll have three options: fight, flight, or. I am in the graduate lounge at school, explaining to my friend that people of color are known to have tighter skin elasticity. I'm relating this back to working at a plastic surgery center and reasons why women have labiaplasties. The white woman next to me leans across me to give her input on the subject. It's because they wear all that cocoa butter, she laughs. And when it happens, it won't sit with you right. You'll feel a pang in your chest and you won't be sure if it's anger or sadness. You'll have three options: fight, flight, or. A white woman puts her hands on my face, one palm on each cheek. She is drunk. I am not that drunk. My eyes widen. She says, I just want to be you. And when it happens, it won't sit with you right. You'll feel a pang in your chest and you won't be sure if it's anger or sadness. You'll have three options: fight, flight, or. I go to the health center for an ear infection and my doctor is an old white man from Georgia. He asks me about my background and I tell him I'm from Ohio, and he nods before asking me about my ethnic background. I don't really know my ethnic background, so I tell him I'm a little Creole since my dad was born in Louisiana. The doctor checks one ear for the infection I've already let him know I have. Where I'm from, we'd call you a red bone. And when it happens, it won't sit with you right. You'll feel a pang in your chest and you won't be sure if it's anger or sadness. You'll have three options: fight, flight, or sometimes you end up shrinking deep inside yourself and you end up lost. Who are you? Why are you here? Why don't they believe you? And maybe you're wrong, maybe they're right. They become voices in your head, constantly criticizing you, mocking you. You don't deserve to be here. You don't know anything. You're worthless. Everything about you screams inferiority, from the melanin in the cells of your skin to the kinks of your hair. There's a standard of beauty and intellect that you will never meet because of your breeding. Your options are limited. Are you going to fight them all, 1,000 to 1, teeth bared and fist at the ready? Beast. Are you going to get in their face and scream, spit flying onto their cheeks with every consonant? Savage. Are you going to remain silent, bite your tongue, and swallow back your own blood, words, and pride? Coward. Are you going to take your anger out on their loved ones? Bitch. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? The moment is disappearing. What is your gut telling you?
Thank you so much for reading from that piece, Negesti. That is actually the piece that I remember reading, that piece and How to Steal a Culture, which is the other. I mean, I love all the pieces in the book, but those two in particular are my favorites. And they're the two I remember standing out to me in particular when I first read your manuscript a couple of years ago. And the
Mhm.
two that while I was reading, I thought, oh, I really, really want to work with her on this book. I think this is going to be a really fantastic book. So um, I hope people got a little taste of things with that. Um, I've got a few questions I want to ask you, but I wanted to encourage anyone watching, if you have questions at any point, go ahead and throw them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that now. And at the end, we'll have time for questions. But I just wanted to say that in case people think of something while we're talking. But I just wanted to ask you, as you were writing, um, when did you sort of know you were writing a book, that you were writing something more than just a piece here or there, that what you had was going to be a collection?
So in graduate school, we have to write a thesis that is essentially a collection. It has to be 120 pages. And so I kept thinking, well, this will become your book while I was putting together that thesis. I don't think that I ever at any point when writing the pieces individually was like, oh, all together these make a book, you know? It wasn't until I was arranging them and I was like, okay, we've got some pieces about public space and culture. We've got some essays about the body. We've got some personal essays. And I was sort of thinking about how to arrange them. And so I came up with the title, but I didn't have the title essay ripe. And I guess it wasn't really a book until I wrote Ripe, which was one of the last essays to be written. So when I submitted it as a thesis, it was not a complete book. It was just a collection of essays. And the perk of a collection of essays is that each essay has to be able to stand on its own while also work in the collection. So I knew that they all worked alone. It was just a matter of tying them all together. And so when I finally the essay Ripe was the most difficult essay to write. I think it's one of the longer ones in the book.
Hmm.
And once it came together, it was like, okay, now all of these pieces make sense because Ripe, that essay has everything that every other essay might do by itself, right? So it has body in it, it has coming of age, it has race, gender, sexuality, all of it is in that one essay. So that was when I knew it was a book. So after I'd given it to you, when I gave it to you, it was not a book. It was just a collection of essays. And I was like, oh man, she really likes this. It has to become a book now.
Well, I do remember taking a look at that first draft of it, and then it took me a really long time to respond to you, because it's a university press. I read everything for Mad Creek,
Mhm,
but in that time, you'd worked on it a lot too. And I do remember thinking, I'm so glad that she wants to work on this, that she's willing to work on this together, and thinking there were so many great pieces, and how was it going to come together? But the ripe part of it, the title was one thing we never talked about changing
mhm.
as a press, and we change the title on a lot. We always do that with the author. It's something we do in conversation. A university press isn't usually going to take over your project, change your title, and give you a cover you don't like. But I
Right.
do remember thinking and talking with my marketing department that the title was perfect because of the way it did tie all of those strands together, from sexuality to body to culture. I mean, from the hair essay to, I mean, just all of it. That title really worked perfectly for that. So, um, it's great to see how that also for you helped unify the collection in that way as you were writing it. So,
Absolutely. And I'm not good at titles, so I'm glad it worked out because I do not have a backup title for this book.
titles are the worst, and I think the hardest thing for any author, really, because you get so close to your work. Um, Sometimes it can be hard to come up from a title from that standpoint. I have pretty good luck coming up with titles, but I laugh because authors listen and say, "Oh, that's so great." And the titles I come up with are always come out of the author's work. I'm not the one writing them. They're
Mhm.
usually a line I've pulled out of the collection, or maybe the title of an essay. But in your case, you just had already identified that, which was really helpful. I think even partially in helping me see the vision for the collection, even
Mhm.
before it was all there, before we'd worked on it together. So when you were once you knew were starting to have this come into shape, uh, what were you looking for in a publisher, or what challenges did you have in looking for a publisher for the project?
I definitely wanted a lot of agency. So you found me through the help of my mentor, David Lazar. And so that took a lot of the stress out of it. Because I did not shop this book because in trying to get a lot of the pieces published individually, I had had a lot of trouble, especially Marginalia, which is one of my favorite pieces, but also what I like to call the most aggressive piece in the book.
Yes.
Actually, right now I don't think it is, but in the beginning it was, and then I wrote How to Emulate a White Man, and then that
Yes.
overtook it. But
Well, you didn't want to put
Marginalia is
that
up
one
there.
in there.
Um, so Marginalia, just was not getting published. I was submitting it to contests and it was becoming a finalist. Like it has a lot of finalists racked up, but it was just never like winning and it was never getting published. And I was like, what's going on? It's like, what's wrong with this piece that people don't like it? And I'd worked really hard on it. I'd revised it so many times. And so eventually I was just like, it's not fitting these literary journals because of their audiences. And so because of Marginalia having so much difficulty getting published, I pretty much assumed that my entire book as a whole, like the collection, would be difficult to publish because people would say it wouldn't resonate with their audiences or like it would make audiences uncomfortable. And as you know, my entire book is uncomfortable. Like
Mhm.
every essay is designed and written in a way to make you
Yeah.
uncomfortable. And so when you said you were excited about the book, I was like, okay, great. Let's just see how uncomfortable she gets.
Yeah.
And you really championed it. And that got me really excited about the potential for the book. And you also allowed me to have a lot of agency. And I felt like because there was never a point where you were like, maybe you should pull back. Um, and one of the notes that I had gotten while writing the book or writing an essay for the book was actually from David Lazar. And he said, I'll never forget it because I've been chasing after that feeling for years. And he said, this is going to raise hackles and objections. And I was like, cool. I was like, I want like I want people to get upset and uncomfortable and sort of have to face things that they don't want to. I want to pop that bubble. And so you and the rest of the press was never like, hey Negesti, maybe you shouldn't put this piece in, you know? And I just kind of like you guys allowed me to like use my voice and be very authentic. And I just really appreciate that. And it made the entire process seamless. So it really changed how I felt about my work being out in the world because for a long time I was like, no one's going to read it because it makes people uncomfortable.
Well, I'm glad that you say so. When I read the first draft, I mean, it did make me uncomfortable, but I was like, it should. Like that's what the so I guess it seemed pretty clear to me immediately that that was what you were doing that both. I think I saw you, I'm trying to think of what publication it was, but where you talked about how uncomfortable it is to be a Black woman in so many spaces or in so many places, or how uncomfortable you're made to feel
Mhm.
in those spaces, and how you wanted to do that in the book in turn. And I thought it's twofold, right? Like wanting to cause that discomfort, but also trying to, especially I think in the essay you just read in Unbothered, that part of it that you read, trying to convey to someone outside of your experience just how uncomfortable those situations are when people don't notice some of those kinds of microaggressions, or don't think
Mhm.
they exist, or don't, because they've never had to reckon with them. So I what I loved about your manuscript was that you took that head on, and I loved the anger in the piece, and just when you talk about that full range of emotions that Black women aren't supposed to or allowed to feel because of how it can come off or how it can be perceived. And so I know when you told me you had a few other pieces, because we talked about swapping some out,
Mhm.
um, one of them you said, "Oh, I think it's too angry. I don't think you're gonna. I think it's too much for the book." And I don't know if you remember my response was, "Oh, I definitely want to see that one then," because your honesty on the page is such a draw for in this collection.
Yeah, that was in Columbus Alive, with Andy Downing when I said
Yeah.
making people uncomfortable, and it's just yeah, I have been made to feel uncomfortable. Um, I I think it's a sign of being really good at your craft when you can make people feel things.
Yeah.
My my flaw, my toxic trait is that I like to make people feel uncomfortable, when they read my work, and so, yeah, that piece, um "Oh, Dumb American" or "How to Emulate a White Man" was definitely a piece where I was like, everyone's gonna get really upset." Because when I was like it exists in different forms, so that piece exists as, vignettes, and those vignettes aren't in the book, but basically when I came up with the concept of the piece, I was like, "Well, what if you could just spray on, like, white male privilege? That would be interesting." And so when I wrote it, I had, like, come up with these ridiculous commercials, of like, for this perfume, and they were all just, like, highly inappropriate and upsetting, and every time I told people about them, people would just look at me like, and I'm like, "This is the reaction I want, but it's scaring me that no one will publish it." So the vignettes are not in the book, but I think everything that came out of the process of writing it is in the book because when I wrote that essay, I was like, I don't at first it was a lot of like fury and anger, and I was like, this is not I was like, first of all, too much space for white men in a book about a Black woman. And then
Mhm.
and then I was like, I don't need an essay to just me be angry and complaining about things. I need an essay where I work through these feelings and try to figure out why they're there. And so what I think is really interesting is that essay went from like being a rant in a or early draft to like becoming an essay where it's like, well, actually we're all kind of to blame and this is a cultural problem and not a personal problem. So and I turned that essay into you and you really didn't have that many comments on it. And that was wild.
I liked it. I just I yes, it was clear to me in really early on that you had a well-crafted voice. So the work that we did do together was more so I felt like helping you stay true to that voice,
Mhm.
and not trying to write outside of that, or try to write to what you thought the book needed to be, or what you thought the book should be, or what a book is supposed to look like. Um, which kind of brings me to talk about audience, because you talked a little bit about um, sort of like who is the audience for the book. And I think it's the hair um, essay in particular that you talked about how you completely rewrote it for audience. And I think that's a really fascinating story.
Yeah. So when the hair essay is one of the first essays I ever wrote that ended up in the book. I wrote that my first year of graduate school, and my professor, um, very simply during editing was like, "Well, who did you write this piece for?" And in my head, like I told them, I was like, "Oh, I wrote it for white people because that's who reads like that's who reads things. That's what the publishing world looks like. Like when when you go to a conference but for writers, you're mainly going to see white people. And it was difficult because I'm writing about my hair, and so like the term perm and relaxer mean completely different things for people of color versus
Yep.
white people. And so I was like, I was explaining myself a lot in that piece, and then my professor was like, don't write for that, like write for people who know what you're talking about. And I was like, okay. So that really changed my entire perspective about writing. Did it lead to a lot of questions and a lot of workshops? Sure. I'm team Google, which I think you've heard me say before. Like,
Mhm.
you should Google something that you don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the book is written for Black women because I followed Toni Morrison's idea of write the book that you always wanted to read. And
Yep.
so I wrote a book for myself and my sister. I found that in writing it, a lot of other women of color related to it. And so it's largely for women of color and other people in marginalized communities. And then sometimes sometimes it's written like, I think everyone in a marginalized community, and that includes women, um, can relate to the book in some way. And then there are moments in essays where it's like, well, if you're offended, it's probably because you have an amount of privilege that doesn't allow you to understand this concept. And so I think the book is really about privilege and the ways that it sort of exists in everyone's life. Like, I also have privilege, and I'm not shy about that in the book, you know. There's never a point in the book where I'm like, well, I didn't have zero privilege. It's like, no, I had privilege, but you have to, it's a checks and balances situation, right? Like, so in Unbothered, a lot of the microaggressions are about people and my education, because that's like my main privilege is education. And many times throughout my life, people have just been like, oh, well, you're Black, so obviously you don't have that good of an education. Um, so that's what it's kind of, it's about privilege. It's written for marginalized people, mainly women of color and Black women, but I think there's a little bit of something for everybody in it.
No, I definitely agree. I think that was great advice that your professor gave you to not privilege a certain audience that you think is the audience people are looking for. And yes, you're right,
Mhm.
that's probably a challenge placing pieces then.
Mhm.
But I think it's part of what makes the book actually oh, now I can't think of who said it. It was at one of the moderator of another author's event a few weeks ago, and he's a reporter who was talking about very specific um, people writing their very specific stories. Actually, in a lot of ways, makes these stories like more universal in
Mhm.
terms of being really specific and really true to who you are, and writing through that allows people outside of that experience to get a glimpse of that. And I
Mhm.
think one advantage to your book too is the many different forms that it takes, because you're writing in different styles, you're writing different kinds of pieces, and I think that also gives people like lots of different entry points to the work that you're
Yeah.
doing and to your vantage point. And I think that that is why the book is for that audience, but I think audiences outside of that too can get so much out of it as well. So I
Yeah. Absolutely.
was going to ask you what was the hardest piece to write that you ended up including in the book?
Oh, well, hmm. I guess it depends on when I wrote it. So, what will follow, which is obviously about everything that happened after my dad died when I was so young, was really hard to write, but I also wrote it uh 8 8 years ago. So it wasn't hard for me to put in the book. Like, I was like, "Oh, yeah, you should probably put the essay about your dad dying in the book since you reference it." So I would say, if we're not going by time, I think the hardest was Ripe, the title essay. I knew what I wanted it to be, and it was just not coming along. Um, it was At first it was very research heavy, and like thinking about what does it mean to be 25, and then it became very personal, and I was just trying to combine those two in an artful way. And then I constantly had to go back and ask people in my family, like, what were you doing when you were 25? And make sure those were right.
Yeah.
And I feel like every few months or so, someone would say something that deeply contradicted what I had put in the book. And I'm like, listen, it's going to be published. I need the facts to be right. But ripe was hard because, like, I had to acknowledge this, like, this 2-year period in my life where I was very depressed, right? And just like feeling so alone. And so I had to write through that from this new place, right? And I feel like ripe I started writing it when I was 26. I started writing it just after I'd been prescribed Prozac. And I don't know if you know how Prozac works, but it takes like 6 to 10 weeks to like fully kick in. And so I was writing it, but I was still like heavily depressed and anxious. And then as I like I didn't write it in one day. And so as I continued writing it, I was like in a better place mentally. And then something would happen in the world, like the pandemic, or the murder of George Floyd. And then I just would like spiral again. So that essay is written during like a lot of ups and downs. And I was trying to not have the essay move up and down, but to also like reflect the fact that I'm supposed to be an adult and literally everything around me is chaos. and, and I don't know how to feel about it or what to do, but also write an essay that comes to some sort of conclusion. And so I just remember one time when I finished the essay, I was sitting, and this was after the book had been like, you guys had accepted the book. And I was like, all right, now I have to finish this essay. And I just remember sitting at a coffee shop being like, man, the book, I like mangoes. At no point do I talk about mangoes in this book. It's time to talk about them. And so I like wrote the end part, which gets into like how you pick a mango. And I feel like it's a very niche thing, but in writing about that like simple process, I was able to like bring the entire piece together, being like, okay, this is when a mango is ripe. It's really difficult to figure it out. This is how I pick mangoes. It might be different for you. And I just use that as an allegory for like coming of age and becoming an adult. And so it was a doozy of a piece. But
Well,
I think it turned out well.
it did because it works really well. It was one of the reasons why at the press we ended up for a time centering on that essay and that piece and looking at that potential to rip off that for the cover, which is
Hmm.
how we went down sort of a rabbit hole of mango imagery that did not work out well on the cover. We punted that idea and came up with what I think is a fantastic cover for the book, but the piece is so central. It did. Yeah, I'm glad you're holding it up
Yeah.
there. But it's I was so pleased that you loved it as much as we did. But we did for a time look at many, many iterations of covers with mangoes on them, because that piece does such a great job of bringing together all the threads of the book and
Hmm.
in a way that doesn't seem forced or in a way that wouldn't necessarily seem like that piece was the most difficult for you to write. So,
Hmm.
but I'm glad there's not a mango on the cover.
Yeah, so am I. So am I. The lips are perfect.
Yeah.
I think that they actually have tones of like mango color in them,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
So
We
I
have
love
some
the cover.
fantastic designers we work with, so we're really lucky to be able to work with some really talented designers. Well, so on the opposite end of the spectrum then, what piece came the easiest to you then? Or what piece is your favorite piece in the book?
Oh. Okay, piece that came the easiest. Um, Reclaiming a Name was a really easy piece to write. Its first draft, I wrote it like the night before it was due. It was supposed to be it was originally 750 words, so it was very short. I just played a Kendrick Lamar song over and over and over and wrote down my thoughts. And then the editing of it was really easy. Like it was just like, oh, put down every thought that you couldn't fit into 750 words. So I love that piece because it's about etymology and, race, gender, heritage, which is something I wanted in the book, but was just way too big for this project. So the way it's in there in smaller increments is perfect. And then, so that was the easiest piece. It's also one of my favorites. My favorite piece personally is interlude, the part thugs skip. And it's because, and again, remember that was a piece that I threw in last minute. Like I was just like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna put this in here, and Kristen either hates it or she loves it. And you didn't say anything. And I remember looking at your edits like, alrighty then. And but I knew that if I was going to write a book about being a Black woman and like becoming an adult, I had to have an essay about, like, I used to call it the Black love essay, right?
Mhm.
And I have always been obsessed with that little line from J. Cole, where he says, "This is the part the thugs skip because the entire verse is about love." Like, it's just an ad lib just thrown out there, but I'm just
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, like nobody wants to read about love. And so I always wanted to like put that cliche love essay into my book, but obviously it wasn't coming together because I was trying to force it. And then one day I was in residency at the Ragdale Foundation, and I was just um one of my cohort was married, and she was telling us how she met her husband, and I was just like, "Oh, that's a really cute love story." And then I kept thinking about everybody else's wonderful meet cutes and love stories, and I was like, "I don't have that." And then boom, the essay just created itself. And so I love it because it's my little love essay that I always wanted to write, and it's like sexy and upsetting and honest and vulnerable, and just it's one of my favorite pieces. I love it so much.
Well, that's why it's perfect in the book because it is all of those things. It fits perfect thematically, but it's doing the same things tonally in a different way, um, that a lot of the other pieces are doing. So, no, I think that makes absolute sense. Well, I want to open things up to questions from other people. So if you have questions, you can just type them right in the chat and I will see them. Don't be shy, because otherwise I'll just ramble on and ask.
I just I also want to say, remember Kristen when that piece was Adam and Eve?
Yes, I do.
That was something that seemed really inappropriate, but I liked personally, but I'm glad I changed now.
Yes. Well, I know when I was editing too, I'm also a big fan of if you don't know, Google it. Um, and I think I told you, I mean, and I told you early on, look, I always want to be true to your voice. And as an editor, I'm here to guide you through the publishing process, but I don't want my voice to come through. This is not a book for me, or that's only like, this is not about whether I like the book or whether, like, it's a book for your audience and it's a book for your voice. Um, but I do remember sometimes typing stupid questions into the margins of your manuscript and being like, because I realized how old I was too. That was part of when I was reading your manuscript. I was like, this is either a phrase I'm not familiar with, or this is like something that this needs to be edited. And sometimes I would Google it and I would think this is a phrase that I'm not familiar with. I'm old. Like I'm older than I used to be. And sometimes I forget that. So um, I was
No,
glad that we had a good relationship and could talk back and forth about those things. So
yeah, no, it's okay. There's a lot of very niche pop culture references throughout the book, and it's just like you either know it or you don't know it. And they're like, I watch a lot of weird television and movies,
I wouldn't
and
call them all very niche. Like some of them I Googled and I was like, you probably should know that. So, but, um, but I do think I think it's a good illustration, hopefully, of what the editor author should relationship should look like, which is an ability to talk through those things or to talk about, why are you framing it like this? Or why are you calling these characters Adam and Eve? Or like why that extra, I don't remember if I encapsulated as like removing it, like that removal from self where your
Mhm.
honesty is such a gripping part of things. Um, but yeah, I appreciated that you were always willing to respond to that because, like I said, sometimes I have questions because I have a question and sometimes they're unfounded. Oh, we do have a
Absolutely.
question. Thank you,
Oh,
Kathy.
yay.
Are there authors you'd recommend to new nonfiction writers, writers who have influenced you?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I get really excited about nonfiction. Okay, so obviously, first things first, Hanif Abdurraqib, who blurbed my book. He wrote They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, which is a collection of essays that are steeped in pop culture and race. And it's beautiful. I've read it like 6 times. He also just published another collection of essays that are steeped in culture, called A Little Devil in America, that's all about Black performance. There's an essay in there about Beyonce's work ethic, and it's incredible. Yule Abyss, I met her in graduate school. She was introduced to me in graduate school, and I also got to meet her. She wrote a lovely collection of essays called Notes on No Man's Land, and it's a beautiful essay collection, also about race. And it's important to note that Eulabis is a white woman, and I say this because when I read her first essay, I did not know she was a white woman, and like she wrote an essay about lynching and the creation of the telephone that is just beautiful. It's called Time and Distance Overcome. Let's see. Eulabis, Hanif Abdurraqib. I think everyone has to read James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, which is just like a single essay, but you have to read it. See, I wish I was next to my bookshelf. Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. That was really influential to me writing my book. What else is over there? Elizabeth Alexander, who's written nonfiction. She also writes fiction. She has written a book of cultural criticism also on Black performance. Hers is from like the early 2000s, maybe the 90s. Like it's older, but that was really important to me in writing this book. Like there are so many. Angela Pelster, who wrote an essay about mangoes that I'm absolutely obsessed with, and her book Limber is just so important to me. It's funny because you read a lot of nonfiction and then someone asks you this question and you're like, I don't remember anything. Kevin Young wrote The Gray Album, which is a very chunky book full of essays on culture and race. What else did I read? Oh, Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. The most important essay in that book to me, it's a collection of like essays and speeches that she wrote in the 60s. The most important one to me is where she coins the term womanist, which is actually in an essay about Shaker women. And if you don't know anything about the Shaker women, you should read it because they're actually really fascinating. And then also the title essay where she goes to find Zora Neale Hurston's grave, because Zora Neale Hurston was sort of buried without a marker, which like Zora Neale Hurston is a wonderful writer and that should not have happened. I'm gonna stop there, but
I think you've given some for people to
a
get
lot of
people
books.
started there.
Yeah, that's a good starting list.
That'll fill up their reading list for a little while. So please ask other questions. I have one in the meantime, though. I was going to ask you, has anything surprised you about the reception of the book? Like either like from friends or family or anyone?
A lot of people really like this book. I think that's the most surprising. I knew it was going to make people uncomfortable. So I was like, people are going to get mad. And so far no one has. Well, I don't know if they've gotten mad. And so and so that like it's been really positive reception where people are like, well, your book really changed my perspective, or made me think things. And that's really all I want, is to, provide like a counter perspective for people who live in a bubble or who aren't really sure about how other people navigate the world. So that's been really positive. The amount of like young Black women who have like gone to a reading of mine and just like said how important the reading was to them and how impactful it was has just like overwhelmed me because that's all I wanted. and like it's just been really like wonderful to see so many people be like, yes, I experienced it too. Thank you for writing about it. Like, I'm glad that this book is here. Um, yeah, so that's been really impactful. My friends have been great. Like, they've just been hyping this book up since before it came out. So I don't even like they're just gonna say things that are nice. And so at first I was like, do I believe you? But no, they're being genuine. Um,
I
but
do
yeah,
remember you saying that during the process, like, "Well, everyone's just gonna hate it." And I thought to myself, "No, no. No, there's a difference between making people uncomfortable and everyone hating it." But I think it's one of the things I thought when I read it was I haven't read anything like this. And I think that's a lot of what you're seeing reflected from, people who are at those readings who can identify with it is that because you did get feedback, you were submitting it, like you said, places wouldn't pick it
yeah,
up to publish it. They would say that they liked it, or they'd
yeah.
say it was a runner up. So if they're not getting published on the piece level, what does that say about those larger books getting published? And so n- that for me meant this really needed to be a book. It needed to be out in the world so that people could see themselves reflected in it. So
Yeah, I'm also just a deeply pessimistic person. I find that that is just an easier way to do things in life. Like you're never disappointed. So
critical.
so I was like,
That's the word.
okay, yeah, I'm critical. And
Yes.
so like before the book came out, I was googling myself very heavy just to see what other people were saying about it. Since the book has come out, I've stopped googling myself because I'm just like it's out in the world now. There's nothing anyone can do to stop it from being published. And so I just hope that anyone who really enjoys the book like reaches out to me on Instagram or Twitter to let me know. Um, but yeah, it's been great. It's had a really good reception, and I'm excited to see the future of the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, did anything, I guess, on that same sort of line of if anything surprised you, did anything surprise you during the publishing process, or I guess in that period when you're like sort of when the book's in with us and then you're like waiting for it to be out with the rest of the world?
I didn't know there was a paper shortage. I I that was surprising. I didn't know. I guess yes, it makes sense that we could run out of paper, but I didn't consider that as a possibility until I was told, by the way, there's a paper shortage and your book won't be coming out when you thought it would be.
Yeah.
But like I said before, that wasn't so terrible with you all because the book was done and you guys kept like promoting it and sending arcs to places. And so like the Kirkus Star was like huge. I you guys sent me the email. The book wasn't out. I got a Kirkus Star. I had to go to the website and I was like, I don't know what a Kirkus Star is. I
It's
had to
good.
Google it and I was like, oh wow, this is like a really big deal. And so that was awesome.
Well, you got
So
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's been great seeing the reception the book has gotten before it actually was published, since it was
Yeah.
pushed back like by a month and a half and it's gotten really good like press and reception and people have enjoyed it without it being out. And that was just like really surprising because not everybody had an arc. It was just like the mail was doing its thing and it was getting everywhere across the country
Mhm.
randomly and sporadically. And so that was great.
Well, you did have a few that I remember several of them felt like they were coming in at the same time in that sort of heightened publicity time where you've had some really great shout outs and Nylon and
Mhm.
Lit Hub and the
Yeah.
Kirkus Star is great. So yeah, I think it can be weird for authors though because it's like, but the book's not out yet. So how are you reading it? How is this
Yeah,
happening? But the process is particularly sometimes opaque in that way. But yeah, book in all good things in this case. So what are you
absolutely.
writing now then?
I am in my not writing phase, which is actually a really good essay about not writing. But
Yeah.
so I work full time, and so I've
Mhm.
just been focusing on that. But I've been writing in my head. So I've been coming up with pitches for essays that I have no place to put. And so one of them is on teeth. I've written an essay about teeth before. It's in Seneca Review. It's a lyric essay. It needs an addendum because in the time since it was published, I've had 2 root canals and my wisdom teeth extracted. So I'm like, you got to write about that. Um, I've been thinking of writing an essay about love-lorn tropes of women in television shows, specifically comparing Degrassi to Euphoria because Degrassi is on HBO now, and I've going down that. And then yesterday I was watching. I've been thinking about writing about a lot of TV and pop culture. And yesterday I was watching Jeepers Creepers, and I was like, I should write an essay about how the Creeper is like a pansexual horror icon, just because that movie is like wildly erotic for a horror film, but not a good movie. I don't know if you've ever seen Jeepers Creepers, but
I haven't.
it's not a good film. Horror enthusiasts do not like it. I love it.
Ah.
But I love bad movies. So I've been thinking about writing about the Creeper and like comparing it to other iconic bad horror films. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about writing about popular culture. One thing I wanted to write about was I had a book title in my head that was like all of my favorite celebrity couples have broken up, which was going to be about essays on love. Um, but that statement is both true and untrue because I don't think all of my favorite celebrity couples have actually broken up, but it doesn't sound good if you say some of them.
Most.
So
A lot.
yeah, I've been thinking a lot about writing about popular culture and just sort of popular culture, the body, love, sex, things like that. Just I feel like I haven't written everything about race. Race is just so ingrained in everything I write. So like all of these things will have a racial element, but I'm like, let's see how this book does. Let's let this book live on its own because I feel like this book is my most vulnerable self. I've said everything that I felt like I needed to say that I wasn't being allowed to say.
Mhm.
So I just want the book to exist and live for a little bit without me.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Well, we have another question too about what were some of the bits of pop culture that most influenced or resonated with you when you were growing up? Um, and then how does non-literary pop culture resonate with writing for you?
Um, I'll start with the latter half. I listen to a lot of music when I write. I was a psychology major, and so extroverts typically listen to music with words, introverts typically listen to music without them. And so I am a music with words person. So I will like sing while I write, which can be difficult sometimes, but so a lot of albums and music um influenced either my pacing while writing or my tone while writing. So there's a lot of Kendrick Lamar influence in my book. Um Lots of rap and hip hop, but also R&B and pop culture. It's all over the place. But I
Mhm.
also write to soundtracks. So music is a big influence, non-literary pop culture influence. I also love a film essay, um, which is basically any essay, any film that moves like an essay does. So a good example is Moonlight moves like an essay, and it's written in 3 sections, and Moonlight is just a beautiful movie if you haven't seen it. Um, I'm like Parasite kind of moves like an essay as well. But yeah, and the first part of the question was what are some of the bits that influenced me while growing up? I watched a lot of TV. Well, okay, that's both a lie and not a lie. We didn't watch TV in my home. We read in my home, okay? My cousins lived across the street and they had a TV and I watched TV over there. And so I saw a lot of like 90s TV shows and movies, and that's kind of like the main essay Ripe, which is about growing up, a lot of that idea of what being an adult looks like came from what was on ABC Family and MTV at that time. So like Boy Meets World, Seventh Heaven. It's interesting because I was mainly watching like white television shows, which now, like, if you've ever gone back and watched Seventh Heaven, which I recommend everyone do, it's just evangelist propaganda.
Oh, yeah.
But like Seventh Heaven was important to my core of my identity, you know. Seventh Heaven, lots of TRL, so lots of music videos where women were like at their sexual peak, you know. And also lots of movies. I'm a big Jurassic Park film girl. My mom took me when the movie had come out. Movie came out in 93. I was born in 93. My mom took me in 93. She hates the movie because apparently I cried so much she had to leave. I love the movie. I watch it all the time, so that's how that panned out. I was a big I feel like I grew up in an era of television where just anything happened. Like I said, I watched Degrassi. Please, if you have never watched Degrassi, please go back and watch it because it at no point chills. Like the first episode is a 12-year-old literally meeting up with a stranger online. And I watched that as a kid and here I am watching it as an adult. But then I also, like I said, I read a lot. Like I read pretty much everything I could find, anything I could find. I was reading history books. I was reading books on like mythology, zodiac stuff. Like I'm just a very curious nerd, and that really impacts how I write because I write how I talk, which is I ramble, and then I clean it up and make it pretty. So yeah, lots of anything science-y and pop culture pops up across my work just because that's what I'm interested in. And I'm interested in how pop culture makes things I'm interested in how far off pop culture is from reality. And that just fascinates me because we are just consumed by it, you know?
I think in your book too, the way you blend your love of and interest in pop culture with the history, the historical, or some of the research components. Um, but how those come together, I'm thinking about in the essay where you talk about makeup and fashion in particular, how they come together. I was also thinking about when you read about Eminem,
Yeah.
and talk about that and the complications of looking at this white rapper as like this. Yes. Anyway,
I'm a
but I
big
just think,
Eminem fan.
yeah, well, he's a talented musician. Um, but yeah, but looking across sort of how you bring those trends together, I think is really interesting too. It's clear, I think, from reading your book that you do have a passion for reading and across so many different subject areas. I think the mythology component, I think, comes across even in how you're writing and framing some of the pieces in the book.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Well, I think that's about the time that we have for today, unless anyone has a real
Yeah.
quick last question.
This is your last moment.
Last
And
prompt
then we're off.
to ramble elsewhere for the day.
But actually,
I didn't know that bit though that you shared about introverts and extroverts, what kind of music that they listen to. It's interesting
yeah.
that you can write to music with words. I find that
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah. I wrote a lot of this book belting Hamilton in the middle of the night.
Mm.
So, and there's no Hamilton lyric in the book.
No,
So,
there's not. I was gonna say I don't think there's any in there. Whereas I edited to classical music. So, because I can't have other people's words in there when I'm reading your words and have my own words
oh
in my
yeah.
brain.
Nope.
Too many words.
Just all the words.
Okay, all right. I think we'll call it
All
then.
right. Well, thank you so much, Kristen. And thanks, Books and Books, for having me. This was a blast. I hope everyone enjoyed it and finds me on Instagram.
Dude, she's worth a follow.
Well, thank you both for joining us this afternoon, and thank you to everyone who tuned in and for supporting Books and Books. Oh, we have a question. Someone said something.
Oh,
Oh,
sure.
someone said thank you. Okay.
Great.
Yeah,
Well,
of course.
thank you everyone who joined, and thank you too for this amazing conversation. It was so interesting to listen to, and I hope everyone gets a chance to read this book. And don't forget that you can buy this book in person or online at Books and Books. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Right.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye.